Oh, whoa! Ah, I was so close that time. Oh, so you're playing Splatoon 3 side order, huh? Yeah. All this DLC really shows me is that DLC can really change up a game, and that's really cool to see. Although you're not wrong, I can't completely agree with that. Huh? How so? What? You want to hear my opinion this time? Well, we've done this so many times that at this point I really just expect this. Wow, so you just accepted it, huh? Well, you know where to sit now, don't you?
DLC is a pretty common thing in video games nowadays. It would almost make you believe that it's a recent thing, but in truth, this concept existed for a long time now, even longer than you may be thinking. DLC is content that isn't already in a game getting added by downloading it. Updates can be seen as some form of DLC if it's adding new features or content, but what we've accepted it to be is content that is completely different from the base game. So a new game mode that brings new ideas, new characters for some genres of games, new locations, and so on. When this concept has started is a bit shaky. Like, you can technically say that Sonic 3 and Knuckles is its own form of DLC since it adds new things to the base game. But since you aren't downloading that content and using a piece of hardware to make that even possible, that's more of an expansion than anything. DLC actually started appearing in the Dreamcast. Yeah. Sega's last console. I miss the times when the big three were Sega, PlayStation, and Nintendo, but I wasn't even alive during that period. Anyways, since the Dreamcast had online, you could actually get DLC, but then Sony made it a lot more refined with the PS2. But you would never believe me if I told you DLC actually existed much earlier on PC.
I mean, that is kind of already obvious given that PCs already had internet access. Well, when you put it that way.
Anyways, the first game that had DLC is a game called Total Annihilation that came out in 1997. Yup, that's when DLC first existed. And with that is the end of the history lesson.
Way to have a slow start in a video. You know, I don't really appreciate how you break the fourth wall sometimes.
As with everything, there is the good and the bad. And of course, DLC is no exception. When it first started, it would more times than not be free content, but it wouldn't be anything too game changing. But then around the Gen 7 consoles era, DLC became a lot more frequent. This would pretty much be close to what we see DLC as. They would always try to be an expansion to the base game and not try to patch up holes that should have been in the base game. So like, if there was a DLC that brings a new story to a game, it would more so be a side story than a crucial addition to the main story. Fighting games would always bring new characters using DLC, and that one is pretty debatable whether it's a good point or a bad one. One can make the argument that DLC characters would typically be too strong and change a meta to that genre too much. Although to a degree I get it, it also keeps a game alive. Tell me how hyped people are about Smash nowadays compared to a couple years back when they were still adding new characters. To some games, it's a great way to keep a game alive. Like, look at Melty Blood type Luminar, even Dragon Ball FighterZ. Sure, there are still some people who play the game, but can we really call it flourishing? But it can also be the opposite. Take Sparking Zero as an example. Not exactly a fighting game, but it is getting DLC for new characters. Although its first DLC came out quite a while ago, that game had people talking about it for a couple of days before going back to its rather low numbers. By the way, this isn't me trying to bring hate to that game. It's only bringing me to my next point. It has become pretty rare to see a game bring genuine new content that isn't new characters, new story, or new locations to a game using DLC. There are times where DLC brings entirely new experiences that makes it comparable to a whole new game. My favorite example of this has to be the Splatoon series' DLCs. There are now 2 games in that series that have DLC and both have to be very phenomenal. Splatoon 2 bought the Octo expansion, which does have a new story, but it also gives you a new single player experience that would later shape the formula they would use for Splatoon 3's story mode. Splatoon 3 on the other hand bought probably my favorite DLC of all time. Spoilers for my next video, but side order is the greatest thing to come out of Splatoon. I love roguelike games a lot. They bring endless fun no matter how many times you play it. And when Splatoon decided to make a DLC like that, most of my hours on that game had to be from this one mode. These two examples could be a way to try something experimental for if there are plans on a sequel. If it does well, you may end up seeing it incorporated in the next installment of the series. Many DLC out there really just bring stories and things that are already in the base game, so it's pretty hard to find examples of other games that do this. But overall, DLC can be pretty good. On the other hand, what has happened with DLC lately? I'm going to be real with you. The only reason I'm making this video now is because I realized how greedy companies are with DLC recently. If you can't guess, yeah, this was because of the prices from Sparking Zero's first DLC pack. You know, the more I talk about this game, the more it looks like I hate it. I don't for the record, but it does have its faults. Bandai Namco is actually infamous when it comes to pricing their DLC. Whether it's for their anime games or for their fighting games, they have definitely caused an uproar recently. Tekken 8 had some drama a while back with its first season as they tried to make it so that you have to buy one of the new stages even if you had the season pass. That was actually pretty ridiculous looking back at it, because imagine if you had to pay for all the stages separately if you bought the Fighters Pass in Smash Ultimate. I have a feeling something similar may happen with Sparking Zero if they decide to add new maps to that game. Anyways, it seems like companies are starting to get out of hand with their pricing for DLC. The Splatoon DLC I mentioned a moment ago was only $20 for a completely new experience, and I personally have no problems with it. But let's look at Sparking Zero's first DLC pack really quickly. They're charging about $18 for about 11 characters, no new maps, no new music, and no new story or anything like that. That would make every character about $2. Sounds good, right? Well, what if I told you some characters in the DLC just reuse moves from the base game, and also bear in mind, Bandai actually counts each transformation as one new character. For example, Gohan has 4 forms in the DLC, and Bandai counts that as 4 separate characters. So essentially, the number is actually lower than 11 characters, making the price of one character about $4 per character. Yeah. There are times where DLC exists to pretty much add things that should have been in the base game. I didn't even know about this until I was writing the script for this video, but Tekken 7 actually has DLC you can buy that shows you the frame data of moves. You know this display that's shown in pretty much every fighting game's training mode now? Yeah, that's a $2 DLC for Tekken 7. I get that this game was made in 2015 before this feature was normalized, but this DLC came out in 2019. I'm just going to move on from Bandai's terrible DLC practices. The Destiny series is a series I actually don't like. I bought both of them for some reason, yet both games did something I really hate. I also bought Destiny 2 before it became free to play and still don't have access to its expansion pass. That's besides the point. The game is actually really fun and plays well in my opinion, but if you were to play the base game stuff, you can pretty much finish it in about a day. This is not a cheap game, just so you know. Then after, the rest of the game is pretty much hidden behind its expansion passes and whatever. Yeah, I'm just gonna stick with Borderlands.
You know, DLC kinda sounds like a scam. I mean, you can't see it that way. No, I mean, if you think about it, you may be losing more than you think.
Of course, there are many examples of DLC out there, but you do realize that we used to have games with no DLC as a normal thing before. The practice was to make a pretty complete package of a game, and if there are new ideas or something, just either add them in updates or make a new game for them. Yes, making plain old updates to add content may end up losing the company money, and yes, making a new game entirely is expensive as well, but why is DLC so normalized now? It's not like they always add something worth the price anyways.
You're not completely wrong, but I think it's fine for games to have DLC.
There are some games that are good the way they are, and because of that, there would be DLC constantly added to a game, making there be no real reason to have a new game. It could also be a way to make waiting for a new game a lot easier. Mario Kart 8 had its DLC a while back, and although it started pretty shaky, it ended up finishing spectacularly. A game like The Binding of Isaac just keeps getting DLCs and it keeps the game alive that way. The game is good as it is, in terms of what the developers probably think. So there's no reason to make a new game, but DLC makes it possible to add new things to an arguably old game. I guess free updates too.
And that's the thing, why can't they just be updates? Well, you have to remember, if it's just a plain update, then it's not necessarily bringing in new people, so you would be losing money that way. I guess you're right about that. And you see, that's why sometimes it's good to have DLC. Well, either way, I'll never praise this practice, if it's not free. Weren't you just playing Splatoon's DLC not too long ago and said it was good?